In 3, 2, 1. All right, hello everybody. Welcome to Virtual Fridays Diary Literary Series. And tonight, my guest is Dewitt Henry, and he's the one that's just a number up there. So we'll get him changed, so you all know who he is. Let me tell you a little bit about Dewitt. Dewitt. He's mostly, when people think of Dewitt Henry, they think he is the founder of Ploughshares, but Dewitt is a memoirist, he's a novelist, he is a short story writer, he is a poet, and he has published multiple books. And let's see if I can get to the page that I can show people. Here we go. So here's one of his books, Endings and Beginnings, Family Essays. And there is Mr. Henry. And you can go to his website, DewittHenry.com. There is plenty to read. There's writing tips. There are his books. It'll tell you where to purchase his books. He has a lot of academic credits in his bio. And it's just, he's had pretty much a career in writing, and here is a lot of things to look at. So that's his website, and it's a pleasure for me to have as my guest tonight, Mr. Dewitt Henry.
Well, thanks for the invitation to Dire Zoom, Tim, and for your support over many years. Actually, each one of these books has debuted one way or another with Dire. So I want to open with a long poem that's narrative, and some people might call an essay. It's about exploring nature reserves in the larger suburban west area of Boston, mainly because of the pandemic, but without realizing that there is a lot of tragedy lurking in the landscape. This is called Lost. Several times the size of our backyard, bordered by stone walls and a clearing of dense woods, the Metfern Cemetery holds 296 graves with numbered cinder blocks indicating the order of deaths from 1947 to 79 and marked by P for Protestant or C for Catholic, no names. The remains came from nearby institutions: Fernald State School for the Feeble-Minded, the nation's oldest institution for people with developmental disabilities, and Metropolitan State Hospital, an asylum for people with mental illness. These are in quotes. Both now closed. Advocates for the disabled forced the state to release the names of those buried, which in turn prompted a history teacher and his class at Waltham's Gann Academy to research their biographies and post them on a special website. My wife Connie and I knew none of this as we first entered the woods of Beaverbrook North Reservation. We'd been exploring public hiking trails, masks at ready, since the pandemic had closed gyms and crowded the Charles River path. The forest and wetlands of several hundred acres on the Belmont-Waltham border, and a short drive from our home, promised miles of isolated shaded hiking. An online map showed meandering trails like veins in the back of a hand. Our path rose and dropped underfoot from drumlin ridges to gullies. Thick ranks of trees with vines, bushes, wildflowers, and weeds. No wildlife yet, just birds and squirrels. Now and then humans intruded, masks up or not, avoided us, some with dogs, mountain bikes. After a mile, we'd gotten lost. We followed one path wider than others, saw a sign in the distance, a wall. A cemetery had been featured on the map, I recalled, and here it was. We had our point of reference. While Connie checked her GPS, I puzzled over markers with numbers, but didn't bother to read more of the sign than Metfern with some dates. Anxious to make our way, we confused directions, chose a path beside a marsh, emerged onto a street and sidewalk that joined Trapello Road. We'd found civilization at last, but now must follow sidewalks a mile to Trapello's intersection with Mill Street, then left on Mill for another mile past the entrance to McLean's. to our parking lot at Lone Tree Hill. We should call an Uber, I joked. Across Trapello, I recognized the entrance to Fernald State School and its rolling grassy acres. However, the Welcome Center, the only building visible from the road, stood surrounded now by dirt piles and heavy equipment. Being enlarged or replaced, I suppose. I'd volunteered there shortly before we met 48 years ago, I told Connie. I'd answered an ad in the Boston Phoenix. Bored with the square? Put your energy to work with retarded children. With a new PhD and no prospects, I'd driven out for an interview. The young woman in charge asked if I knew any mentally disabled people. No, I answered, but I'd read about them, seen them on TV. There used to be one in our town, mascot of my high school. I didn't mention that I planned to introduce a Down syndrome child into my first novel, so needed to research. She'd shown me around. I'd started in Farrell Hall, a new one-story complex for ages 6 to 12, girls and boys. We passed a man shuffling by in shorts and Red Sox shirt, grizzled crew cut. He grinned toothlessly and waved. We passed more stray walkers with their awkward walks and baggy clothes, rundown playgrounds, and then first women. We passed a chapel of holy innocents. At Farrell, I met the supervisor and staff. The kids were innocents. Some bored, some watching TV, playing games or coloring in the rec room. Others in a classroom gathered around a teacher who played piano and led them singing, "Mary Had a Little Lamb." At first, beaming with goodwill, I helped the older kids to read stories, try conversations, play ball games or Red Rover. We would on walks holding hands. I remember their faces lighting up, although some troublemakers acted out and needed staff to calm them. The campus had 42 buildings, housed 2,700 residents and staff. Different groups were separated by age, sex, and severity of disability. They had a hospital, a gym, bowling alley, an inside pool, a farm, a vocational building, a laundry, a kitchen, a bakery, and a power plant. The school's mission was to maximize development, either in preparation for return to the community or as the basis for a happy and useful life within the institution. Over time, however, the school had become primarily a refuge for severe cases, causing the superintendent to complain that they must struggle to find pupils suitable for parole and work on farm and essential services. Residents' destinies were mapped like circles of the inferno. They shifted from ward to ward, group to group, conditions worsening as they aged. I lasted for 3 visits. Returning to the young, agile, careless crowds of Harvard Square, I felt disoriented, carrying memories of the wheelchair-bound, encephalitic dwarf who spoke gibberish, but gestured ruefully and had intelligent eyes. Finally, I stopped on the hill above Farrell, intending to report, but couldn't force myself forward, nor could I keep from leaving. The child I imagined in my novel is saved from institutional life by her widowed father and the woman he courts. She belongs with us, the woman insists. There's nothing else for her otherwise, not even a chance. On return from our hike, I studied the trails as well as the local history. Fernald had closed in 2014 and the Metropolitan State Hospital in 1992. The city of Waltham bought the lands. Clients had been sent from Fernald back to relatives or to private community-based settings and to special education programs. Lawsuits and settlements preceded the closing, along with rising costs and post-Holocaust rejections of eugenics. Former residents complained of sexual and physical abuse, of little education and less affection, of superficial and mistaken diagnoses, of overcrowding, of boys in the 1950s being used for medical experiments, such as being fed radioactive cereal, of sterilizations, of forced labor, of warehousing for convenience, of solitary confinement for captured escapees. Their stories were widely publicized with release of Michael D. Antonio's 2004 book, The State Boys Rebellion, followed by PBS and CBS TV documentaries. Of course, once aware, Connie and I found our way back to Metford's graves. I noticed that stone cairns had been balanced on different markers by strangers or by families, such as on C-125, which the website identifies as Adeline Ward, born in Lynn, Mass, 1907, lived with parents and 3 sisters until committed to Fernald, 1951, died of a cerebral hemorrhage, 1968. Most had markers overgrown. C-136, Claude Moran, worked on the farm, suffered burns in a shower, then died a week later, age 66. P-124, Sally Kanorian, born 1959, placed at 18 months due to her Down syndrome, died of pneumonia, 1962. Row after row. Since 1979, Fernald's residents have been considered residents of Waltham and buried in the city cemetery. According to Gann's history teacher, Alex Green, the Metfern dead were the least fortunate among the thousands of inmates who passed through these places. One path leads to another. Eventually, we find home. Maybe we can talk later about how that would have shaped itself as an essay. Here's a shorter one that is more of a poem. It's about suffering as proof of love, on ordeals. A test of character, a trial. Will you break, endure? The ancient rites, to walk on coals, for instance, physical punishment, not as punishment per se, but as a lie detector. Once proven guilty, still worse awaited, maiming, exile, death, yet most, I'd guess, confessed in order to escape the trial. Imagine Hotfoot, a rogue with feet so calloused and quick, he always danced free. Or Job, divine initiate, blameless and upright, his earthly goods taken, 10 children killed, his body afflicted with loathsome sores, counseled by friends and patients, rebuked for justifying himself rather than God, and finally crying out only to be shouted down by the creator of Behemoth and Leviathan, who nonetheless delivers him, fortunes restored with interest, 10 new children born, same wife, and blesses Job with ripe old age. Or Oedipus, ignorant of his own crimes while seeking to purify Thebes. Or martyrs to belief, St. Jones or Thomas More, anonymous self-immolators protesting unjust war. Soul-making, Keats thought, soul-revealing, Plato. Raising children, laboring for hire. The rituals of grading, obliged to sort my students' thoughts as my best teachers sorted mine. Politeness and forced smiles. The marathon or mountain climb because it's there to prove I can. Football practice in high school, stacking hay bales on a baler sled. Overreaching as a writer, career reversals and tenure fights. Courting readers never found. Root canals, accidents and surgeries, alcohol and other addictions, loved ones lost to sentences of pain, traffic jams, unnecessary routes, death camps. We make the gods more just. I'd run through fire for love, flame resistant, or perhaps duly purged. Cremation, since you asked. Last one, my version of upbeat, it's called On Germans. Not citizens of Germany, haunted by fascism, V2 rocketry and Nordic perfection, but seeds, as in all Germans spill at once that make a grateful man. Germs. Wash your hands to kill the bad ones. Wear gloves and masks, but also plant the good ones. The germ of an idea, which proves germane to problems of the day, and which can grow, spread, and flourish into grand designs. Fertile seeds that germinate, like social justice in Zola's novel, Germinal. New starts, spring itself. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dewitt. That was a wonderful reading. And I'd like to have some questions for you. And we'll start off, we'll talk about your first piece. That seemed to prompt a few questions. So, and these, I'm going to try to combine two of them. You wrote your first piece as a poem rather than an essay. And also, they said that some of your other published pieces read like a poem. So in other words, are you working in a hybrid form, and how did you arrive at this hybrid?
I wish I had an instructive idea or explanation for it. I came from a career in fiction and memoir, long form narrative. In my book, Sweet Majoram, which is all I have for sale right now, where I started to play with topic-centric meditation, let's put it that way. So I just found myself, I guess I wanted to make a point that when people write dramatic stories, they aren't out of touch with abstraction and interpretation of trends and events and themes. That storytelling is a way of meditating also. It's a way of exploring conflicts, ideological as well as physical, and searching for some kind of thoroughness of at least trying to reach an understanding, what Frost spoke of as moving from delight to wisdom, which is in fact the figure a poem makes. After I'd done that book, I found myself not wanting to take the time and do the research and create the kind of rhetorical cloud that a lyrical essay asked you to do, at least as I envisioned it. And be more brief, accept the white spaces around and the limitations around a poem, and use that also to meditate on a topic, but to take advantage of readers' expectations for poems, I guess, to be more open to the play of wit, velocity of wit in free associating that I think actually takes the place of formal rhyme.
So when you start out on something, do you decide beforehand, this is going to be a poem, or I would like to write an essay today? Or do you just kind of, you've already started, then it forms itself into whatever it's going to be? What leads? Does the horse lead the cart, or does the cart lead the horse here?
The culture leads the horse. When I hear words on television or in discourse, and they strike my ear as cliched or unexplored or illy defined, a word like empathy, for instance, which we all find blindly, we don't realize what a modern word that is. That it's almost it's a post World War II word. And before that, it meant something quite different from what we think of as walking in another person's shoes. There's also I'm if you look over my shoulder, that's a shadow box that my my niece makes. She has a whole line of them. She's a sculptress, and that's Shakespeare. So I've spent 40 years teaching Shakespeare, and I love Shakespearean themes. If you go beneath the plays, you find the most amazing adventures in hunting and taking a key term and playing with it, like the term necessity in King Lear. So I kind of thought I invented a form that was good to be an essay, but also worked as a poem. And that the form is to start with linguistic DNA of a word like empathy, or a concept like bloodlines. And look at overlaps of usage and definition, and what they suggest. And look at pop culture, look at technical meanings. Bring in, without being pedantic, what's in my head as a normal head of things that Shakespeare said, or of other classical literature as quotations, and not be embarrassed about them, but to feel them on the pulses of the pursuit of the clarity that you're searching for.
I'd read up, and there's a question here from John, and he said that you had worked with Richard Yates. Tell us a little bit about what you learned from working with Yates.
Honesty in the use of words. The form of the short story, yes, but more than that, that you have to be honest. You have to risk yourself in clarity. If you can't, in creating a character or having an opinion about the way life happens, or in searching for meaning, if you can't be clear about that, if you're just adopting the poses, or you settle for easy solutions and easy words. He has a story called Builders that opens with the narrator talking about the fashion of being a newspaper man, and that he had to have a special kind of hat. And then there's a parenthesis, and he says, no, that's not right. It was a pork pie hat. It had to be more exact than that. And that kind of exactitude is a function of honesty, and it takes a lot of work. You have to start with some sense of intuition and desire. But once you're making your assertions, you have to be able to face your lack of knowledge, your fuzziness of observation, your questionableness of attitude, until you hit bedrock.
Well, with writers like Yates that have lived fairly tragic lives, is there any insight that you have about the tortured artist or the tragic artist, or their ability to go places or not go places with their writing?
Well, I actually wrote an essay called Bungee, which I think is about that, in a book that I called Safe Suicide. And now there is no such thing as a safe suicide, right? No one escapes it. Nor is probably there's safe sex or safe life. I mean, these are sort of easy fictions that we comfort ourselves with. But in Bungee, I was looking for a moment of not quite mortal risk, but something that had a saving grace of a chord there. So you commit suicide without committing suicide. You take that leap and you realize the velocity of the fall and how quick it goes, and you're upside down and everything, the world's upside down. But before you go splat, there was a surge of that bungee cord. and you're saved this time. And I think that's something that I don't know if I learned it from Yeats or if it came to me from my pillow, but something about imagination and that we too easily think that you have to do things as an individual, literal things, in order to imagine them. And you know, I love the line that Dora Welty has, where she said, basically, you don't have to be an adventurer. True daring comes from within. And you work through those death-defying moments in your imagination so that you don't commit them in life. I don't know if Yeats knew that.
Elizabeth wrote, what subjects do you find yourself revisiting in your more recent writings, and what subjects no longer seem to compel you?
I guess I just finished a poem that was a meditation on modes, and triggered something that's sustaining in me, which is a contempt of fashion. And maybe that's also from Yeats. A man or a woman is not a function of appearances and this year's in dressage. It's more than that. And I think that that's what I believe about literature. I think that, you know, I've lived a maverick literary life, believing in verities. Verities as I feel them on my pulses, and yet surrounded by a marketplace where verities are not entertaining, and Netflix is, and all of you here, I know, the ones I know personally, I know you're writing pretty well. I think are in the same mode. That out there is a world of deliberate and accidental success in being commercial, in pleasing mass audiences, which for a literary writer means 10,000 or less. I would be happy to have 500. But
go ahead.
Back to this essentialness thing that you know, it's what you know is true. And you may be Don Quixote, and maybe your idea of truth is insanity, but you have to stick to it.
So isn't that kind of a, it's kind of opposites with writing, I notice. And you've spoken in the past about, you know, writing, you write for necessity, but it's also pleasure. And you write to be spontaneous, but then you have to turn around and be responsible with your writing. Explain that a little bit.
Well, it's one of my favorite quotes is Charles Simic, who says, "Trust your nuttiness." I would say that's the same thing about spontaneity, that when I sit down to write a lengthy essay, or when I sit down to write a novel, and I've only published one novel, but I have an unpublished. If I'm blessed, maybe there'll be another one. Those are like, there are marathons. They're long trips. And besides the big climatic moments when you know, that seem juicy or delirious and fun as you write them, all the connective tissue of structural storytelling, whether it's in memoir or whether it's in fiction, is a lot of work. And you find yourself having to do, you know, build a context of explanation that pulls the reader in. and that you earn your big moments. But the big moments are probably what made you start in the first place. Is that an answer?
That's a great answer. So let's wrap up a little bit about Ploughshares. All right, so rumor has it started in a bar, the idea, and so don't take us through that first night, but during that first night, did you ever conceive of Ploughshares ending up as Ploughshares? And through the years, what did your time there teach you, and how did it impact your own work?
I'll refer you to my website where I talk a little bit about it in a video. That was 50 years ago. The writers who were inhabiting my landscape at that time were accidental. They're hanging out in the Plough and the Stars bar. And they're anti-war, they're afraid of getting drafted. They feel shut out by an establishment called Houghton Mifflin and the Atlantic Monthly. A few of them have had some kind of brushscape with what I would call the maverick world, which would be places like the Bowery and Haight-Ashbury and Iowa City. And so here they are in an Irish pub, or a quasi-Irish pub. And they have different heroes, but they all are driven by the dissidence of not fitting in, not seeing a way forward, just having their writing. And so there was a sense of what you've been doing too here for years, of bringing people together out of enthusiasms that are not being nourished by a system, by an establishment, by a culture, and creating a kind of free zone. So no, we never thought there would be a second Ploughshares or a third or a fourth. They were all necessary because of the sacrifices that people made to make them happen, because of the quality of writing that we discovered in each other and through our friends and different networks and so forth. And we simply believed that there should be an audience and that none of us individually could go out and do headstands in public in a way that would create that audience, but together we could. And we believed that from one issue to another. And somebody had to pay the printer. It was always the writers of the last to get paid, right? That took 20 years in itself. But the amount of talent and zeal that rallied to the sense that there really needed to be a first-rate, writer-edited literary magazine that people, in the wider sense of readers, needed to learn what a literary magazine was. When we got our first office in the suburbs of Watertown, after being in my second bedroom for a couple of years, the people on the block said, "Library magazine, what's that?" And I, in fact, got hired finally for my PhD for a full-time job at Emerson, because the president at that time wanted to start a professional writing program, and he wanted an editor of a magazine, and he had no idea of the difference between Ploughshares and the Atlantic Monthly. So, a wonderful man named James Randall stuck me in that way.
All right, last question of the night. It's from Michael Keith, who is an academic and a creative writer. So he wants to know about your process, and do you find it difficult to separate your academic writing from your creative writing?
Well, I've never published on Shakespeare. My academic writing has always been my creative writing. And I was actually fortunate in my teaching career to be able to teach fiction writing, literary publishing, and literature. So in one day of my life, I would be trying to make Macbeth or King Lear come alive for television-bred creatives in the classroom. Then walking into a fiction workshop and trying to help people find the story in their story, which I think is the hardest thing to learn. And then later on in the same day, end up in a seminar of publishing graduate students who wanted to know about surveying magazines. And I'm not talking about literary magazines, in all the universes of magazines. How depressing is it that our cultural magazines, the New Yorker and the Atlantic, have no more than 400,000 subscribers?
It sounds like it's an amazing, well, I mean, I'm a big fan of Ploughshares, and a lot of people are commenting in the chat. A lot of subscribers, a lot of fans, a lot of great writers appeared in their pages. So anyway, I would like to thank you for appearing tonight, Dewitt, and all your experience and your great writing. Hold up your latest book once more, and tell us where it can be purchased. We already know where, support your local small independent or even larger independent bookstores by buying books like DeWitt's. And, you hear every day, like things going down and not making it because of the pandemic. Poets House in New York is taking a big, long hiatus. Maybe they won't be back. So support the people while you can, so they won't have to make difficult choices. And
two good places to support are Harvard Bookstore and Newtonville Books. They both have signed copies of Sweet Majority.
Great. So thank you once more. If you're watching on Facebook and not in the Zoom room, thank you very much for watching. If you ever want to participate in the open mic or the question and answer, log on to the Zoom link. But for you guys, I'll say good night to you and thanks very much.